I want to welcome you to this not somber but celebratory occasion. My name is Sean O'Connell. I've been a colleague of Duncan's for nearly 50 years, and seems appropriate. There will be a series of speakers, as you can see, and I'll try not to get in their way. But this is my 2 cents. Hail to thee, blithe spirit, so said Shelley of a skylark. So say I of Duncan Nelson, a man who met his first meeting of each of his classes wearing a big floppy butterfly wings in front of me. His students laughed, but they knew that this was Duncan's way of announcing that they would all soon take flight. His blithe spirit still soars in this room today. How he would have loved to be here, to stand on a chair, don his bays, invoke his muse, and versify us, pouring, as Shelley put it, his full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. Though the indeed profuse strains of Duncan's occasional verses were thoroughly meditated and well-wrought. I was reminded of Shelley's To a Skylark by Bob Crosley, our legendary department chair, first-rate scholar, writer, and friend. Bob's retired now and is suffering from severe pains and could not make it to this gathering where he had planned to draw upon Shelley's poem in his tribute to Duncan. So I am gratefully guided by Bob's inspiration. Duncan was my friend for more than 50 years, but we got off to a rocky start. 10 minutes after I met him in the spring of 1968, we were toe-to-toe yelling at each other. He then supported Eugene McCarthy, while I backed Bobby Kennedy in the contest for the Democratic Party presidential nomination. But that was the only time we raised our voices against each other, and I have long ago forgiven him for favoring the wrong Irish-American candidate, and I think he forgave me for my intemperate enthusiasm for Bobby. I later became Duncan's campaign manager when he ran for department chair and lost to Jim Broderick by 1 vote, ending my career as a political consultant. Duncan has been a true friend to me and my family. There, in times of need, there to celebrate weddings and anniversaries with commemorative verses and elaborate toasts. Dorothy and our children, Michael, Liam, and Kate, loved him. He was always fun to be with, always a glass-half-full man who refused to look on life's dark sides, no matter how insistently I pointed them out. He was also a great editor, and he would have scolded me for using 2 cliches and a mixed metaphor in that sentence. During the days of the Jimmy Carter gas crisis, we commuted between Sudbury and Park Square, telling stories, gossiping, filling the drive with high hilarity. For a while, we competed in holding large parties in our Sudbury homes, and we attended similar parties in Boston. I won't speak here of that Pinckney Street gathering where Duncan ended up on the floor atop Professor Mary Doyle Curran, who lay flat on her back atop a broken rocking chair. All right, I'll talk about it. Mary used to preside, grande dame that she was, in a bow in her apartment that looked out on Lewisburg Square. And Duncan came in and enthusiastically leaned over to kiss her on the head, putting his arms on the back of the rocking chair, which gave way and led to one of the more memorable moments in party history. The crowd went wild with enthusiasm. Beebe and Duncan were extraordinarily generous hosts, particularly during those endless steamy summer days when I drove our kids to their side of town so they could swim in the Nelson's pool. Our children have grown now and no longer need that pool, Indeed, Duncan and Beebe sold their quirky Sudbury house and moved to Annisquam nearly 30 years ago. Now Duncan is gone. But in my mind, he is still there, standing tall at the edge of the pool, poised to dive and join us in the swim. Rare for an academic, as some of these photographs have shown, Duncan was a first-rate athlete, strong and graceful, particularly at tennis. For more than 50 years, Duncan Nelson, poet laureate of UMass Boston, loped the department halls, behatted and bemused, with unrelenting good cheer. He has honored hundreds of public occasions in and beyond UMB in his witty, wry, insightful verses. He has taught his classes with elan, energy, and good humor. His office door was always open, and passers-by could glimpse him conferring with one student or another, trying to help them to be the best writers they could be, to express themselves in prose as clear as a window pane, to find their best voices. His approach to teaching was unique, spontaneous, flexible, situational, and creative. He loved to teach, and each semester, summers included, he took on a demanding schedule of classes with a particular focus on those which featured extensive writing insistence. When his car was sideswiped and wrecked on Route 93 South, he asked the tow truck driver to drive him to UMB so that he would not miss his class. His students loved him, and long after they graduated, they remember him. His approach to teaching was unique, a performance art, spontaneous, flexible, situational, and creative. Duncan was his own man, his own syllabus-free pedagogy. I respect him and I salute him for his dedication and his sustained success. A rare bird was Duncan Nelson, one of a kind, the open heart and lyric memory of his department, this university, and this gathering. So, inspired by the absent Bob Crosby's invisible presence, I cite Shelley's first two stanzas. Higher still and higher from the earth thou springest, like a cloud of fire. The blue deep thou wingest, and singing still dost soar, and soaring ever singest. In the golden lightning of the sunken sun, o'er which clouds are brightening, thou dost float and run like an unbodied joy whose race is just begun. Thank you. A series of speakers, and I'm very pleased to have my former colleague, Richard Lyons, appear today. I was reminiscing with Richard about a moment when he and I were playing golf at the Concord Country Club, hacking around, me more than Richard. And Duncan happened to pass by and said, "Let me hit one." And he hit one 270 yards straight down the fairway. Richard and I looked at each other and slumped on playing. We couldn't measure up to him. But Richard Lyons.
Having left the English department for periods of time over to the dark side of administration, my personal memories of Duncan come mostly from our early decades of being together in the department. I knew him as a colleague and, with Beebe, as a giver of terrific parties, and as a golfing partner. As colleagues, we had exchanges on teaching literature and writing, two topics on which Duncan had strong and personal views. Whether I agreed with his views or not, I could not miss his passionate commitment to the act of teaching. As for parties, I came to UMB after 12 years at other institutions and while at them, I attended and gave a goodly number of academic parties. Duncan's parties were decidedly not academic. They were not just people from different departments. The guests came from the several social worlds in which Duncan and Bibi moved. I always met new people. That ease and breadth of social connection was an important part of Duncan's personality. And golf. It was because of Duncan's generosity that I got to play with him in Concord's very good private course. Duncan, as we know, was a superb natural athlete, and he could hit riveting shots, one of which Sean just mentioned. He could hit riveting shots, but tennis, not golf, was his primary game. So he sprinkled a little bit in each game were shots that went astray. And I was able to see the nonchalance with which he treated adversity. Golf is famous for irritating less skillful players, leading to books like A Good Walk Spoiled. Duncan took everything in stride. I was not even sure that he was keeping score. Duncan was a man of many talents. He and his son and daughter were regionally ranked father-son, father-daughter doubles teams. Ginny and I, and my wife, attended a play that was put on by the skillful Concord players in which Duncan gave an excellent performance in one of the lead roles. And of course, there were his inimitable, memorable memorial poems for persons of note departing UMB. I think, however, that Duncan's greatest display of talent was simply continuing to be the same Duncan. As much as anyone I have ever known, Duncan lived by his own rules. And of course, that he could do this for so long and with so much exuberance and sense of fun is extraordinary. He will be sorely missed.
So unfortunately for me, I am not Askold Melnichuk, our beloved colleague who sadly can't be here because of a death in his family, and I know he's brokenhearted not to be able to be here to share this tribute to our beloved friend and colleague and mentor. I did want to say just for myself that I cannot think of three different objects without thinking of Duncan. It may sound strange, but it's true. I know all of you will know what I'm talking about when I say that I cannot think of him without his bays, his fez, his hat that he wore at every special occasion and at moments that counted. And I can't think of him without thinking of a chair, since he needed to stand on one to make sure that everybody felt honored and respected as he gave his welcome to a class or gave his welcome to new colleagues or to colleagues retiring or to anything else. And the other thing I can't think about without thinking of Duncan is the couch in his office, where he spent hours and hours and hours talking with students with a sense of utter joy at the opportunity to do so. Incredible pleasure at being able to tell them and reassure them that their writing mattered enormously because their thoughts mattered enormously, and sharing that sense of his excitement about them, I think, was invaluable to so many students that Duncan worked with, and that is, I think, a special gift that he had as a teacher. So now I want to read what Askold prepared, but I just felt like I had to say something myself. So these are the words of our colleague Askold Melnichuk. Duncan was unlike any English professor you have ever met. He was a big soul. There was nothing petty about him. Though you'd run into him in the hall day after day, Duncan treated each encounter as though you had not seen each other in ages. He'd cock his head, which was always crowned with a crisp fedora, smile, and it was always a big smile, utterly genuine, nothing forced about it. And he'd tell you, as he had told you just yesterday, how glad he was to see you and how lucky the department was to have you. And you believe him because he actually seemed to know your work and mean it. And you'd walk away thinking, yep, they are lucky I'm here, aren't they? Of course, we were the lucky ones, lucky to have someone so deeply learned, so eloquent, and so diversely gifted. He was a certified Reiki master, a bona fide healer, a composer of the deftest rhymes since Sullivan sans Gilbert, who also performed in shows and operettas and reportedly played ping pong like a pro. A colleague so gregarious and generous that you wished you could bottle whatever it was Duncan must have imbibed at a very young age so you could pop it open at low moments and hear his voice boom out the virtues and talents he projected onto you. He did the same with students who'd enter his office timidly and leave on a cloud. Though he came from a storied academic clan, he wore his erudition so lightly that eventually it dawned on you that Duncan knew something that couldn't be learned from books, that in him knowledge had metamorphosed into wisdom. He once told me that his father, a celebrated scholar of I forget what, gave him just one piece of advice in his life, and it's something we should perhaps all take to heart. Duncan, his father said, because you've chosen the path of the academy, you must always, always remember this one thing: never trust a dean. Characteristically, Duncan himself always granted an exemption to whomever happened to be the dean of CLA at the time. I would add of honors of other areas too. Characteristically, Duncan himself, oh, sorry, I said that. Ah, Duncan, how we miss you. Truly, his like will not be seen again.
Thank you, Sean. Duncan Nelson and I once got into a John Milton rap battle. I lost. We were at one of Elsa Auerbach's end-of-semester comp program parties. I don't even know how it started, but there Duncan was, standing on a chair at Elsa's house, proclaiming, it's my best Duncan, of man's first disobedience and the fruits. I picked up the next line, then Duncan, and so on until I missed a line, and that was that. I then helped myself to a second drink. In a profession that purports to be progressive, Duncan was a rare, real revolutionary, where cynicism is assumed by some to be shorthand for intellectual prowess or depth of character. Duncan was a true iconoclast, always smiling, always laughing. He loved all of his colleagues, tenure stream or not, and treated them as well as staff students and anyone he met with the same reckless compassion. Duncan, a teacher in all that he did, embraced a pedagogy of joy, a pedagogy of love. Anyone who has ever seen Duncan work with students knows that he was the member of the department, a department chock full of brilliant and committed educators, who best exemplified our commitment to UMB's mission and to our students. Duncan never phoned it in, never winged it. I actually have a little bracket. This is an insert wing joke here. Never winged it, and renewed his commitment every day to a job that, for a man so bounded by mirth, he approached with steady seriousness and dedication. I believe that Duncan, like Holden Caulfield, whom he loved so well, wanted to save all the children, and he believed that he could, and he basically did. As he continued teaching well into his 80s, He inspired me, a man less than half his age, to redouble my own commitment to the students of my alma mater. To slightly bastardize the aforementioned Milton, Duncan lifted up what was low in his students and illumined what was dark. Most beautiful of all, though, Duncan helped his students cultivate their own brilliant voices, helping them to see that they didn't need muses, at least not external muses. As cliche as it is to say that Duncan helped his students find their own voices, that's really the best way I can find to describe what he did. Duncan's commitment to the university, where he taught for 49 years, was nothing short of superhuman. He never showed up to an event or a meeting for the sole purpose of being counted, to schmooze, or out of a reluctant sense of obligation. Duncan always brought enthusiasm, and often a humble number or two, even to insufferably boring department meetings, with due respect to my department chair who's sitting 10 feet from me. One quick story about Duncan's commitment to UMass Boston and to our students. For the last 4 years, I've been involved in UMass Boston's team run for Crystal and the Crystal Campbell Scholarship Fund, named for the UMass Boston alumna who was among those taken from us in the marathon bombings of 2013. Each year, shout out to Heather Brigham, by the way. Each year, Duncan came down from Gloucester to the Crystal Campbell Peace Garden in Medford to meet our scholarship recipients and, of course, to give an ode praising the accomplishments of our 2 UMass Boston students who earned the Crystal Campbell Scholarship that year. On an unseasonably cold April morning last year, Duncan, approaching 90 years of age, fighting cancer, certainly aware that his days to remain with us were few, chose to spend one of those days celebrating our students. His ode celebrated the accomplishments of Dawn, a disabled Army veteran, and Scarlett, an immigrant from Haiti. As Duncan's own mortality loomed, he immortalized the work of our students. There is a Duncan wearing a fedora and butterfly wing-shaped hole in my heart. My heart physically hurts. I've cried more times than I would admit to anyone but my mom, who fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, not here. But I'm consoled to know that such a life as Duncan's was lived. I urge everyone to live by that seemingly unattainable goal, that seemingly unattainable standard of simple kindness that Duncan set. Thank you.
Good afternoon. There seems to be a common thread that's emerging, and I'll add my own. A few of us here today, as Paul too, have had the opportunity of being both a student and a colleague of Duncan Nelson. I use Duncan and Nelson together because first he was Professor Nelson, and then as we shared the halls of Wheatley as colleagues, he became Duncan for me. I was a student of Duncan's over 40 years ago and have memories of his commitment to each one of the students in his class. His desire was not just for us to succeed with our work, but to feel and know that we had succeeded. I believe that his obvious pleasure and pride made us all work harder, and this was actually the era preceding the butterfly wing, so I wasn't part of that era, but have come to appreciate it. One of the books I distinctly remember studying in his class was The Great Gatsby. Duncan stressed Meyer Wolfsheim's idea of connections, or as a character stated, connections. At the time, being the dutiful and attentive student, I'm sure that I took notes to make sure that I got this. The emphasis of that particular word stuck. Over the years, I have come to realize the greater importance of this word for Duncan. He made connections with all of us, students and colleagues, which he intended to be lifelong, and as we can all agree today, these connections were lifelong. He took delight in each person's strengths and accomplishments and greeted all with an interested, personal, and heartfelt comment or acknowledgement. I have one poignant example of the force of these connections. I have taught many sections of the intermediate seminar, The Art of Literature. Each student must create and deliver an oral presentation to the class on a topic of his or her choice, which somehow relates to our class work. Each student submits a proposal for me to review during a one-on-one conference. One student, about 5 years ago, chose Duncan as his topic. As we sat across from each other in our conference, the student thoughtfully detailed why this was his topic choice. And the more he spoke, the more he became impassioned, and the more I understood the connection he and Duncan shared. The student had been a returning student, and after a few years off from studies, and although he was unsure that he belonged in school, Duncan inspired him to find his own voice and place. Now, as he was close to graduating, the student wanted to honor the person that he felt was such an encouraging influence. Although this was a bit out of our usual presentation approach, I agreed. On the day of the presentation, Duncan, replete with wings, appeared in my classroom with the student. What ensued was a lively and academically detailed account of the student's classes and accomplishments with Duncan. What I remember most from the presentation was watching Duncan's pleasure with the student's performance, as he articulated not just what Duncan had been able to teach him, but what the student had obviously achieved. For Duncan, this was about the student only. Observing this connection between a student and his mentor brought back Duncan's highlighting the importance of this attribute and his ability to maintain that connection with all of us. Thank you.
Don't worry, I'm not going to read everything. When I started teaching here about 15 years ago, Duncan and his very good friend and colleague, Taylor Storr, our colleague, became my mentors immediately, my teaching mentors. I think they saw the panic in my eyes, and they kept me real close, and they're still very close. One of the things, Duncan and I had a lot of things in common we would talk about, but I know he was very interested, as I am, in Eastern philosophy. So I thought I'd read just a couple of things quickly that, instead of doing some memories, because I think they'll connect, and Duncan will appreciate it. This is from the Chuang-Tzu, and it's just a short piece that I'm sure everybody's heard a version of it. Once Chuang-Tzu dreamt he was a butterfly flitting and fluttering around, happy with himself and doing as he pleased. He didn't know he was Chuang-Tzu. Suddenly he woke up, and there he was, solid and unmistakable, Chuang-Tzu. But he didn't know if he was Chuang-Tzu, who had dreamt he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming he was Chuang-Tzu. Between Chuang-Tzu and a butterfly, there must be some distinction. And as we know, Duncan was man and butterfly simultaneously, so thankfully. And I'm going to read a poem from the ancient Chinese, and it's from the great Tang Dynasty poet Du Vu to his friend, his deceased friend, and the other great Tang Dynasty poet Li Bai. And it's called Dreaming of Li Bai. Death, at least, gives separation repose. Without death, its grief only sharpens. You drift malarial southlands beyond Yangtze distances, and I hear nothing, exiled friend. Knowing I think of you always now, you visit my dreams, my heart frightened. It is no living spirit I dream. Fathomless miles, you come so far, bright azure green maples, night shrouds passes when you return, entangled as you are in nets of law. With what bird's wings could you fly? Flooding my room to the last roof beam, the moon sinks. You linger in its light, but the waters deepen into long swells, dark dragons. Take good care, old friend. Thanks.
I'm going to be very brief to leave more time for my far more brilliant coworkers. But as a student of Duncan's, once he came down off the desk wearing his butterfly wings and we could all finally take a breath for the first time, he would announce to the whole class that his purpose was to unlearn us, to unteach us everything we knew, and that at the end of the class we would actually know less than we did when we started. And I understand why that never made it to any of the marketing materials for the university, and it took me a long time to understand what he actually meant by that. He wanted us to unlearn all of those things that we told ourselves that led us believe that we couldn't write, or we couldn't be a writer, or we couldn't pursue this dream. All of those lies we told ourselves, all of those things people said to us that made us, doubt ourselves. And he was right. Once you were free of those things, you could finally be the writer you always wanted to be, and you could be the student you wanted to be, and be the person that you wanted to be. Another one of his things was he would make us memorize the name of everyone in the class. And in doing so, he created a community, and he formed relationships. And, some of those people are still in my life today, and they're very meaningful in my life today. And sometimes you don't realize all of the impacts Duncan had on your life until you're walking through the frozen food section of a Stop and Shop, and, you get reminded of John Updike's A&P, and everything seems to come back. But as a coworker, as a teacher, and as a friend, Duncan had a real impact on my life, and it's going to be a long time before I'm able to ever forget him. So, thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see everybody with carnations. We pass them out because all of us as former students, Duncan came to every graduation ceremony and would hand out carnations to all of us, and he would be there for the entire thing and wait till the end to give carnations. And I didn't even want to be there for the entire thing. So I just always appreciated that he was there. I will be brief. I just wanted to share that when I was an undergraduate English major and I was finishing my thesis, I was also enrolled in Duncan's Adolescent and Literature course. And at the time, I could not have imagined how pivotal his class would be. I was a very strict student, and I always wanted to do my work by the rules. And then I entered class with a professor who stood on top of the table and wore butterfly wings. And I was shocked and amazed, but I was also really nervous about him getting up on top of the table. Not because of him, but it was just like a rickety table, and it was really concerning. It looked like it was going to fall apart at any moment, but Duncan just went along with his poem and his ode that he recited, and it was a moment that I will never forget. He ran his class in a way that I had never experienced. Just like Lauren said, he wanted everybody to unlearn how to write and to simply write. This was somewhat of an unusual idea to me, as a student who felt the need to make an outline and take notes and write your quotes and start your introduction and offer enough analysis and follow all the rules that you're taught in writing. But Duncan told us that we just needed to write, and that was all. To just write, and don't worry about grammar or spelling or organization or structure or analysis versus summary. Don't worry about using enough quotes or citing sources. Just write what you feel and respond to the readings and assignments. Essentially, to just write what we felt about whatever question he asked us. It was very frustrating, honestly, at first, to write this way, and it was really difficult. However, Duncan saved my final project in my thesis, and he made my final year of my undergraduate career so much better. I was only able to get through my thesis in part because of Duncan, and I was able to enjoy it because of Duncan. While we have to abide by the rules sometimes and write what we're told and follow assignments, too often we get swept up in that and forget what writing can do outside of the confines of structure. I used Duncan's tools to get me through graduate school when I was stuck, and I still use his advice today in my own teaching. I tell students whenever they get stuck to just forget about the rules and to write in response to that question. Just write what you think, and then I tell them that they have copy and paste, so they can literally just write and then go back and switch it around and put it into the structure that it needs to be. So it usually works. But most importantly, Duncan reminded me, and I'm sure everyone else, about why I became an English major. And I still hope to do the same for my students, and maybe even convince them to become an English major.
Hi, everybody. My name is Renata Tuco. I currently work in the English department, of course, the home department of the man we're all here to honor. And I love the English department, and I was very grateful to be asked to speak today. Let me give you guys a little context and background. Of the 3 staff members currently working in the English department, 3 were UMB English majors. Also, 3 went on to get an MA in English. One of the other speakers up here, Lauren, formerly of the English department, is also an alumna of the department. To say we feel at home and that we care about our department is to put it lightly. In my freshman year with Duncan, on the roster of the class was the former director of the undergrad English department's composition program, of the department faculty, as you've heard already today. A large number were also alum, many of which have taken at least one class with Duncan, some 5, 10 years ago, some almost 50. We are all part of a supportive and loving community up on Wheatley 6, and it is a community that Duncan was one of the founding pillars. It is an amazing place to be, one that holds dear the urban mission of the university, which encourages students from all walks of life to join in. I, like many UMB students, am a child of immigrants and a non-native English speaker. Because our parents at home were learning English at the same time that their children were, my folks decided to let us learn English not from home, where they would get an accent and always feel a little behind, but from school and from television. My parents were doing the digital classroom thing, I guess, before it was cool, so. As a result of this, I may have really thick glasses now, but I don't have an accent. You wouldn't know that English wasn't my first language. I remember being a freshman, and I wrote that story into my journal for Duncan's class. And he encouraged me to tell that story always. That is what Duncan wanted us to learn more than anything, to tell your story always. As a student in that class, Duncan amazed me and all of us when he remembered all of our names by the second week and learned how to pronounce all of them correctly. He was the first grown-up I ever met that had a stutter, and he talked about it openly one day in class. He said it goes completely away when he speaks publicly. To speak up loudly and to tell your story is how you learn to control what otherwise could control you. It is how you learn how to heal. Duncan always encouraged students to get their stories of their lives out and not worry about getting it right or wrong. This was his pedagogy, the pedagogy of inspiration, of heartening those who may not otherwise have thought about how invaluable their life experience is. When Duncan spoke, you listened. Not because you had to, but because you wanted to, because you loved to. From undergrad to grad to working here, each time that our poet laureate at UMass wrote your name into a limerick, you would sit at the edge of your seat in anticipation, wondering what he rhymed your name with and how sweet the words were of the line that you were in. Through this and so many other things, Duncan brightened up so many days. Through this and so many other things, he will continue to. And for this, I will be forever grateful. Thank you.
I see it's up here. I love it. First of all, it's great to see you. I'm so honored to have been asked to come today. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. My family, Angela, the children, all love Professor Nelson, and they send their regards. Angela's up in Lawrence. She's kind of busy right now with all the gas and trying to figure out how to get people back to living incredibly well. Now, I was so impressed with how everybody else came up here and actually did their 5 minutes. I can't promise you that with me. You know, I've been away from this mic for a while, and it's like I've kind of missed it. So I at least need to have the opportunity to get back at him for all those years that he got back at me. So, you know, over the last few days have gone through lots and lots and lots of emails that I hadn't had a chance to go through, because what many of you told me about sabbatical is true. You go on sabbatical and all those goals that you had about how hard you're going to work go out the window. So I began to read them, and so many of them were from Duncan. And it was, did you hear this or did you hear that? And it all had some poetry. So I start with a couple of those that he sort of shared. One was from Reverend Barry Burton here, and then go into some thoughts. And then I'm going to do what I've done to him on many occasions when he would try to tell me that I was this rapper trying to get out. And so I would always write him a poem, as you know, after he would do his incredible thing, just to mess with him, to let him know that I had a little bit of that in me. And so the whispered conversations, the great shout of laughter that led to happy tears, the giggle, the look of wisdom and unexplainable knowing, I must remember and carry in my soul and in my mind of memories as a well of joy, a storehouse of teaching on what matters most. There will be days when I will miss your merriment and mirth, and sometimes I'll sadly long for all the yesterdays, missing our chats and your gentle, understanding ways. Yet the lessons of the kindness and the love you've taught me and others, and the good things in life you've helped all of us to see, linger as lasting gifts that comfort and will sustain until we all journey to that peaceful shore and see you again as a light in the path toward the dream. I frequently speak about the reality of what we do and how it's a gift to the future. Professor Nelson understood that. I saw in those students and others and all of you what a gift he sort of left for the future. The teaching, the research, the service, the learning that we engage in is far more deeply influenced by the work of our predecessors than by most of us that are engaged in it right now. And what we do now is raised on the shoulders of those who have come before us. And the work we take on is part of our opportunity to advance our work for the future. We contribute our experiences to future generations for them to build on. Professor Nelson lived long enough to know how the denial of education, and he would remind me all the time, you have a story, but I have a story, just as those students said. And I've lived long enough to see that story. I know how the denial of education, the miseducation, and the undereducation has been used to handicap, exclude, oppress. And so I work hard to transform the thinking. He's one of those too frequently overlooked persons who had a way of life and a way of getting to his students from all walks of life, to quietly encourage them to receive access to an opportunity to learn, to embrace every opportunity to education and use it to advance themselves. So I was honored when I walked in and I saw the Butterfly Fund. But I also know that honoring him is something we should do by continuing on the high trajectory he established while he was with us. Honoring him by making this university and the college through which he still touches as many students like you've seen today, in the lives and the ones that he impacted them with the best that a liberal arts education has to offer. Honor him with scholarship that reaches deep into the well of human wisdom and into the well of understanding, and emerges with new and world-changing synthesis for human development. Honor him with teaching that draws students from far and near to liberate their minds and prepare them for a full and abundant life. Honor him with service that engages the world and directs it to the highest achievements of the human community. Honor him by fulfilling the promise of this great institution in its noble vision to produce the best and then distribute it broadly. Honor him with excellence while he sits now undisturbed underneath the palm tree, watching his vision become a reality. So to this man who's at the center of the soul of the University of Massachusetts, Boston, you would float into the room with confidence and flair, examining with a twinkle in your eye the landscape for a stable enough chair, table, or anything you could seize to glide towards and measure for the mounts you would make with athletic ease. Until your late 80s left you whispering, "Don't tell my wife, please." But she sees you, man. There's no end to what your bride can see. I know, but I'm just a little weak in the knees. So I'll hide behind you and don one of two hats. Don't say anything, please. You know what they say when you tell on me that? You have violated the code or maybe a rat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat. Oh, come on, man. You know I would never do that. Because you've shown up with the gifts of words and knowledge and such to classes, events, programs, groundbreakings, funeral, and much. Flowers on commencement. Man, you're such a gentle touch. And much of the part of the fabric of UMB. We miss you, dear gentlemen. Most here will agree. So you've climbed the beacon, stepped along its flame to the sky. Heard you woke up the angels with the sound waving from your voice raised so high, and booked another engagement last night. As everyone rejoiced, including the heavenly hosts whispering, "What a great choice." As poet laureate, a title bestowed with much love, heard you jumping on tables and trying to soar like a dove. Earned a standing ovation just like old times in this place. This time strong enough to stand on the post, not worried about falling on your face. So today, we decided to bring back alive the spirit and creativity that always would drive you deeper and deeper in love with UMB, and even made you the face of philanthropy. Just like your presence, your gift of love and words will always be imprinted in the University of Massachusetts, Boston, into perpetuity. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, of course, if Duncan were here, you would now hear an ode that captured all of the essence of everything anybody has said, but I have his bays with me, but I can't do that. So people have been asking me since I got here, in fact, they've been asking me for several months now, how are you doing? How are you doing? And what I finally realized when people were asking me that is, I would say, I'm doing okay, I'm doing okay. The one thing that Duncan was, not the one thing, one of the things that Duncan was so clear about was how important it was for me to take care of myself. And he really meant it. So that's what I've been doing. Before he died, he said, we have to get a new car. I said, Duncan, we don't have to get you don't need a new car. He said, no, but I don't want to die and leave you with that bad car that we've got. So we did get a new car. And that was just one example of how he really wanted to be sure that I was being taken care of. So that's been cool. I guess Sean and I got an email this morning from Cheryl saying that she was in Denver, anyway, someplace rather far away, and was not able to get her airline ticket changed to come back. So I just wanted to say that I'm very sorry that she's not here, and also to thank her, which I will at some point do in person, of how marvelously she helped smooth those years when Duncan was going to keep on teaching no matter what. And he did mostly, or if he didn't, then she would find someone to teach the course that he was supposed to be teaching. And it really made the last several years very, very wonderful for him. And some of you saw when he was up on these screens doing the, what was it? It was the Years of Service Ode and the celebration. Anyway, he, that and also, is Forrest here?
No.
He had to do a poem for Forrest and Emily's wedding, and that really was a challenge. And he had to go to the church and come down the aisle, and he decided to sing one of the verses of the ode, and that's what gave him strength and presence all the way through September. And then in October, he got to do some poems up on your screens here. That really charged him. It was great. You know, it struck me as I've talked to so many of his students and also colleagues and friends and of course family, he had a pedagogy. You guys just didn't know what it was. I'm not sure he knew what it was, but when you look at it, and if you take what his English department students have just said, and if you hear what students say about his teaching, he had a pedagogy. I think it would be worth it to try to unearth what that was, because it was very, very powerful. And it struck me also that he was, I keep doing is, very brave, very willing to stand there and do what he believed in, no matter what some of you would say about it. So Duncan always wanted to be alive for his funeral, and especially in the last couple of years. And I'm like, what do you mean you want to be alive for your funeral? It's ridiculous. No, he said, I really want to hear all those nice things that people are going to say about me. Well, it happened. In the last 2 months of his life, and a lot more than that, but in the last 2 months of his life, so many people said so many wonderful things to him. And he got it. He got that they really cared about him, that the changes that he's made in students' lives and other people's lives. And then sometime after he died, I realized he believed it. Do you know? I mean, how many times does somebody come up to you and say, oh, what you said yesterday was so good, or, oh, I really, congratulates you on something or other. And you're like, yeah, that's just saying that. He didn't do that. Everything that any of you said to him, about him, for him, was something he took in and made it part of himself. So I bless all of you here and all of you not here for that. And thank you all for being here today, by the way. It's wonderful. And Duncan seldom wrote poetry for himself, but at least one time he did. And so you are now going to get to hear that. Yeah? You set? So this is our son, Peter.
Well, if my dad gave me anything, it's the gift of being too emotional. I remember Dad hitting a wiffle ball one-handed over and over again. I remember being so impressed by that, but I don't remember ever feeling so proud of him as I do right now. And it's because of all of your kind words. So I went in Dad's closet, and I saw this sweater, And you're not going to believe this, but I actually had the thought, oh, this will be too much. And then I was like, Pete, your dad took every opportunity possible to jump on chairs, brought a 3-foot-high teddy bear to one of my football games. So I think he would be okay with this. Dad was extraordinarily the most competitive person I've ever known. And I remember him reading the Sunday Globe, checking the scores. So I just real quick want to give you the score. Dad had 8 children, 20 grandchildren, and in overtime, a great-grandchild. And was so loved being a grandfather when Rowena had her first daughter, told everyone, Rowena had a granddaughter. So a part of me thinks that he had such a big family so he could do so many odes. And we were all blessed time and time and time and time again by his odes. But he actually took the time on a retreat with my mother many years ago to actually okay. My dad was emotional, but he was also a performer, so I'm going to try to dig that up. He wrote a poem about himself. It's called I Dawn Upon Myself. I sing the one that I have never sung, myself. Not mirrored, photographed, or drawn, but face to face, seen as another, dear to me as my dearest brother. Instantly embraced. Where had I gone? Away with what toys? Set high upon what shelf had I hid this God when he and I were young? We lean away, hands clasp so strong. I feel the strength down through my toes, and as I look, all I had ever sought, all I had been and done and wrought, I see as in an open book, flowering like a rose, fresh from my lips, spring's song, and I dawn upon myself like break of day. By Duncan Nelson. Thank you.